what a cacophony of wonderful people on here this morning. I am just making this live on YouTube. So I know we said that the first 100 people would come on through Zoom, and you can use the chat function, and then the remainders will have to split over onto YouTube, where you can still talk to us, but we might not be as attentive because it would mean a lot of flicking back and forth, and I'm not that good at multitasking. So we've had most people join. Everyone's very prompt. As you're joining, everyone, please do introduce yourself and the charity that you're from. Also, if you're in kind of which type of event you're in, so challenge, special, maths, whatever, or if you're in community and just looking to kind of find out a bit more about how things might look or what people should be doing, that would be wonderful. So we'll just wait until everyone else comes in. If for whatever reason your internet drops out and you do leave the session, you may then need to rejoin on YouTube, just so that you know. But I sent through the link this morning, so please do check your emails. For those of you not familiar with Zoom, although everyone is now, you will see a chat box option at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, it should open up the chat, and you will then need to select all panelists and attendees, so that everything that you put on there goes out to everyone, so we can all see it rather than having two separate different conversations. So it will naturally be set on all panelists. Change that to all panelists and attendees. For those of you just joining us, please do introduce yourself. It's great to see some people on here. So range of different charities. Hi, Chris from Richard House, WizKids as well. Good to see you, Charlotte. We are looking forward to kind of hearing your questions and your thoughts as we go through this today. For those of you who it's the first time, although some of you or many of you have been with us before, this is a webinar series that we launched at Ashby Jenkins Recruitment, because we are really passionate about supporting the sector and helping charities and fundraisers adapt to the new normal. We take a really relationship-led approach to our recruitment and to our relationships with individuals. So some of you on here have worked with me for many years, some of you might be new to us, but we decided to invest in hosting these webinars so that we could, I guess, share some positivity. Particularly, we launched these at the start of COVID, where everyone was in panic stations and everyone was on furlough, to kind of keep learning and keep upskilling people. So you'll get some great stuff out of today. And we've got some lovely speakers. The recording of today and all of our previous webinars are on YouTube, so I'll send the link round at the end. And outside of our webinars, we also offer a range of other support, so training, CV formatting, all of that stuff. However, obviously, with a name like Ashby Jenkins Recruitment, our day-to-day is finding people jobs. And the market is coming back to life, which is really good news. Those of you who are joining from community and events backgrounds, I know that it's been a really tough few months for you, and job certainty might not be there, but things are getting better. It's slow moving, but it is picking up. So any way that we can support you with that, please do get in touch. And those of you who are hiring managers who have any recruitment needs, do let us know. So joining us today, again, Catherine Miles and I are reunited. We maybe one day in the future, Catherine, we can hang out in real life people as well.
Yeah, that would be great, actually, wouldn't it? You know, and then you can buy me a coffee.
Well, exactly, that would be lovely. Well, I thought we were gin fans, Catherine, but if you want to be tame, like, yeah, coffee, that's great. So prior to Catherine setting up Catherine Miles Consultancy, she was Director of Fundraising at some amazing charities, including Battersea, Breast Cancer Now, and Anti-Nolan. She was one of the pioneers between the for the high value community fundraising approach. And over the last few months, Catherine has again been supporting the sector through providing loads of training, coaching for leadership, tables for fundraising leadership teams. And she's a real asset to have consulting on your team, which you'll get that feel through as she goes through today. And I'm also delighted to be joined by Jane Curtis from the Charity Events Specialists. So Jane has been working the sector for 21 years, which is amazing. So she's got a lot of experience and seen everything now. You've seen a pandemic, Jane. So basically everything's been done by you, right?
Exactly, everything.
So Jane's worked at an amazing variety of charities and specialises in all things events. Over the recent months, Jane has again been supporting the sector and the events fundraisers through establishing a membership offering and also setting up a Facebook group, which if you're not a member of, I'd advise you to join, which is around supporting events fundraisers, offering a platform to network and share ideas and successes, some of which Jane will reference today. So that's us in a nutshell. I guess we will start sharing the slides. We do have a poll that I'm going to launch for you. So for those of you who've not seen this, there should be something popping up. We just want to get a feel for the type of events that you're planning for next year, whether they're all virtual or physical or a mix. Also, if you're running your own events when you're restarting them, because that will be really interesting. Catherine and Jane will share their thoughts. We were just whispering about that before we went live. So it'll be really interesting to see. And I'll leave that open for a few more kind of seconds, maybe 20, who knows, maybe we can count. And then I'll close that and reveal the results, because I'm sure it will be interesting for everyone to talk through or kind of know whatever all other charities are doing. It's always nice to have a bit of a nosy, isn't it, at this. Catherine, I don't know whether you want me to ask you this now or maybe we wait. I was going to ask, what would you advise in terms of the split between kind of virtual and physical events, or do you want to save that for when we're in the slides?
No, it's fine. So good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's there with coffee, biscuits, and various other legal stimulants. So yeah, I would probably, if I was fundraising director now, be looking for a mix, because I think it's really important to stay in challenge events. If they've been working really effectively for your charity in the past, I know a lot of events teams, and probably a lot of you on this webinar right now, might be getting some tough questioning from your charity about, do we stay in these events with all this uncertainty? Can they take place? Is the income going to be down? And I think it's really important, because of the wider benefits challenge events bring in addition to the income, so that if they're working for your charity, to stay in them as far as possible, even if it does mean it's going to be slightly lower income maybe for the next couple of years. And that's also because, as we all know as fundraisers, if you start to come out of these sort of events, it will take you 2 to 3 years to get back in again and build up. So it is a false economy. So I would go for a mix, because virtual events are doing really well. I know there's some debate this morning on Twitter about whether they're still working. The charities I'm talking to, they still absolutely are. So yeah, I would go for a mix of physical and virtual. But I would probably look, if you're organising your own physical events, I would look at summer 2021 on. I think this autumn and spring, as we can see, there's still going to be significant disruption and very, very changeable short-term disruption, which makes it incredibly difficult for you all as events fundraisers to plan around that. So yeah, I would go summer 2021 on.
Perfect. And Jane, any differing thoughts from that, or kind of along the same lines of summer 2021?
I mean, I would probably err on the side of caution as well. I don't think the beginning of next year is going to look all that different from what we're experiencing right now. In all honesty, having said that, obviously all your charities are very different makeup, mix. You know, you've got different types of supporters. You may have had experience or success with doing very small, bespoke outdoor challenges, for example, which, you know, then no reason why perhaps that could not be done sort of safely. So I think it really does depend on your kind of your charity and your supporters. But yeah, I think if I was going large scale, I wouldn't be looking before sort of summer next year.
Great. Well, I'm going to share the results now, so I think everyone can see that. So both of you are bang on trend with your thoughts. So yeah, a real mix. So 88% of charities are doing that. And then yes, 47% are focusing on summer 2021, 16% on winter. If you're one of those people that is launching or kind of restarting, and you don't mind sharing kind of what type of event, whether it's an outdoor one or something like that, that would be interesting, but don't feel pressured. We don't want to put you on the spot. So I will stop sharing those results now and instead start sharing my screen, which I will just get up. This is the first time that I've ever not been able to see the right one, but that's fine. Just give me 1 second, guys. I do love a technical difficulty, as you can tell. I like to think that I can fill time by just talking loads of nonsense, which is...
I've got it. Would it let me share, do you reckon?
I don't think so. Don't worry. I know it's just a bit likes to test me. Here we go. It's just that last minute test. That should now be up, everyone. So you should be able to see that. We'll launch into the slideshow. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. Smooth. And we, as I said, we're joined by Jane Curtis and Catherine Miles, and we are going to be looking at special events and challenge events and how they will play out in the future, sharing insight, tips and ideas on how best to position your programme. As we said, please do post questions or comments in the chat stream. If you feel like you want to ask questions, that's fine privately. It's easier if it's in the chat stream. I've seen that questions come through. I will come back to that, just bear with me. And then we'll save the chat stream and send it round after the session if it's useful for people, along with the slides and the link of the recording so that you can share it with people. And then, yes, we've got useful information and other learning opportunities at the end. So we'll launch into Catherine. So Catherine Miles, tell me all about what's going to be happening over the next 12 months.
Indeed, here's some crystal ball predictions. And I think those of you that have been working community and events don't need me to tell you it's been quite a challenging year. And I think watchwords for the next 12 months are definitely going to be to continue to be flexible and nimble, because we're going to have this very changeable set of circumstances. I think we are going to continue to see short notice changes in the lockdowns, in the requirements, and those are going to impact on the events, both your own events and the third party program. So I think we will continue to see postponements and cancellations. We know a lot of the big third party events have changed the timings of the year to try and make sure that, they can do the marathon for charity runners next October, but I think we're going to get disruption. So I think within that, we're also going to see some lower participant numbers. And that's not to do with lack of demand, because we know there is huge demand still to do these events. It's because they're going to have to be adapted for social distancing. So those test events that have happened already have had to have smaller numbers so they can set off the start waves in a more sensible, distanced way and cope with the end part of the event as well. So I think overall, most charities probably are going to see lower income raised on the big third party events. So London Marathon, Great North Run, Royal Parks, probably because of these lower participant numbers. So I suspect when you're budgeting, probably most of you are looking at lower projections than you might have been putting in if you were basing your base level as your 2019 results. But in positive terms, I think there absolutely is going to continue to be great returns and growth in virtual events, and particularly in do your own thing. So do your own thing, runs, walks and treks. And that's because we can see there's been that huge growth in people wanting to do physical activity at home, us wanting to all get outside where we can actually see people more safely. And we also know, of course, there is clearly a link between obesity and outcomes in coronavirus. And of course, we all know the benefits of physical exercise and fresh air for mental health. So I think there's going to continue to be big drive and growth in those areas. So I think particularly for those of you that maybe haven't reviewed your do your own thing supporter journey recently, definitely worth having a look at that supporter journey and what people get when they sign up and how you are really helping them to fundraise.
Great. And just in terms of we asked a couple of people that are share their events. So Lucy from Naomi House, good to hear from you. That's where I used to work in my old days as a fundraiser. So you're doing your Santa Fun Run, which is great. And then Abigail, they're planning an outdoor carol concert, which is also really interesting. If people would like to hear a bit more about how those two organisations are doing that, then let me know in the comments, and I can always catch up with Lucy and Abigail and then pop something together in an email so that we can share that. But no, that's wonderful. So next slide, Catherine.
Yes, please. This is going to be like the Chris Whitty presentation, but also hopefully more accurate. So well, I think really to have a think about if you're running your own program of runs and events, and we should say, obviously, I'm focusing here on challenge events. Jane, we're picking up stuff on special events. So again, thinking carefully about when you hold them. So as we've sort of shared, summer 2021, probably safer. And then looking at how you can adapt your own events to social distancing. So do you have lower numbers, different start waves? How do you actually do things around if you're checking bags in, if you're giving out race numbers? How do you do that in the safest possible way? And sense checking, is the event still financially viable once you've made this adaptation? I've been doing off the record Zoom calls with charities throughout this, and it's been really interesting talking to teams who were able this summer to successfully bring back clay pigeon shoot events, golf events. They were able to do the lunch on the golf events with a big marquee with its sides taken off. I mean, people were freezing, but it did work. And also what they were seeing was big appetite for people to come back and be able to do these sort of things. So it can be possible with adaptation. I think, as those of you who are super events fundraisers will know, those supplier contracts are absolutely key, really negotiating those carefully. The events companies we know are under big financial pressure, understandably, but really looking at those cancellations and postponement clauses and being clear about your charity's liability in those. And having a backup plan, obviously. So could you easily move the event if you need to? Can you do it with a virtual offering as well as a physical offering? What are you going to do if you suddenly, as this week, are suddenly in an area that's under additional lockdown? And have a look at cancellation insurance. So the premiums for those have gone up, but if events fundraising is delivering a significant portion of your charity's income, it is worth looking at those insurance policies.
That's really interesting. And I guess for both of you, I'd be, Jane, I'd really be interested in getting your thoughts on supplier relationships specifically, because yeah, as Catherine said, suppliers are under a huge amount of pressure within the event space. What is the best way for a charity to work with them? And I guess, because what we wouldn't want happening is good event suppliers closing down and then not having anyone in place to pick up the market when it starts again. What are your thoughts on how charities can best work with their suppliers, Jane and Catherine?
I mean, I think just sort of in terms of what, as you would with any other sort of external kind of company or whatever, just kind of keeping them in the loop on what your forward plans are, what you're thinking. I guess that would be helpful if they're sort of unsure of business next year, if you're able to sort of give them some idea of what your plans may look like. Appreciate it might not be 100% accurate. I'm going to talk a little bit about AV and production companies when I come onto my slide, so I can talk a little bit about that as well in terms of special events. I don't know if Catherine's got any other thoughts.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably also about looking at trying to solve the problems together. Obviously, they've got every business incentive to try to make these events work and work safely. So I guess it's that particularly if you've got a long-term relationship with a supplier, really sitting down and working together about what's actually going to work here. And I think it's also trying a bit of test. I think it's, explaining to our charities, we are in uncharted waters here, and some things are going to have to be tried, and some things will work and some things won't, and that's okay in this environment. So I think trying to flex and work through the problems together would be great.
Great. Okay, perfect. And then on to next slide. So we've put a question in here, guys, as well. If there are any kind of key things that you've done to adapt your challenge events program. So if you are starting to take out that cancellation insurance, or in terms of changes to supporter journey, it'd be really interesting for you to share in the chat box. But changing the third-party challenge events program, I know someone mentioned marathon in the questions as well. So Catherine, tell us about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I shall come back with some thoughts on the outdoor carol concert as well. If whoever it was who was sharing about the outdoor carols, you've got a lot of demand on the chat stream for people. If you're happy to share, people are fascinated, do share. And I can share some things about other outdoor events as well. So yes, on the third-party challenge events, I think, again, it's about flexibility. So it's about looking at how you can adjust those supporter journeys. And I think the other big thing that is definitely coming through from charities I'm talking to is they're seeing a lot bigger percentage of money being raised online, because obviously participants, it's far more difficult to do a cake sale at work, for example, or a backpack in a supermarket. So how are you really helping your supporters understand how they can maximize their Just Giving and their Virgin Money Giving pages? How much information is there as tips and advice in your supporter journey? So worth looking at that. Definitely phone calls, the more you can call and speak to your participants, that will increase average raised and it will increase remittance. So definitely worth seeing how you can build calls into the supporter journey or more calls. Early bird registration fees are still working, and again, worth playing around with those about timings and amounts. And interestingly, incentives are really working. So particularly incentives around clothing, around t-shirts or hoodies for hitting certain financial targets, definitely do seem to be working with people at the moment. So those are also worth trying and testing and playing around with. I think the other thing is to try to be ready. The advantage we have for 2021 is we have had the experience of 2020 now. So thinking over these winter months, what are going to be your refund and rollover policies on the big third-party challenge events if they get cancelled again or if they get postponed, particularly as a lot of you now, I'm assuming, are working on the basis of you had people from the 2020 events that you've already rolled forward onto 2021. Almost how many years are you going to do that with a London Marathon runner? And trying to work out what your approach is going to be, and also how are you going to handle those conversations with supporters. And what's, I think, very clear from the third-party race organisers is they are clearly going to be offering virtual versions of these events. Now, we know from feedback from charities that a lot of charities did find the 2.6 challenge helpful. In April, it was a helpful hook for charities at that time. Some of the other virtual events, I think people have seen less take up on, the Ride London one, the Great North Run one. So having a think about, did the virtual versions work for you? And if so, how would you promote them? Because I think they are very, very likely to come through. And yes, on London Marathon, I suspect what is going to happen, if you think what Hugh Brasher is facing right now, is there's a huge amount of essentially backlog on those charity runners and on those charity places. And we know they were due to review the golden bonds even before this. So yes, I expect there is still going to be change about how the golden bonds are handled. And as ever, it's really important to have good relationships with the London Marathon, to be talking to them about your charity's specific cases, because they have overall policies, but they also review charities on a case-by-case basis. So particularly your history about whether you have filled your places and have you had rollovers. And of course, the most important thing here, which I'm sure all of you are already on, but do sense check your historic count back on the golden bond places, and did people actually run? Sometimes you can end up in a situation where you think you filled the place, but actually on the day the runner didn't turn up, and the marathon are looking at figures and talking about, well, hold on a minute, you've actually consistently not filled these places, and according to your data you've had, and it's because that sense check of, did you check at the time, did the runner actually take part? So I think it's certainly worth being really clear on what your golden bond historic performance was on those runners, and having as close a relationship with the London Marathon as you can, because they're undoubtedly going to have to review this, because let's face it, this is enormously challenging for them, right? And they've got to change of sponsor. I think the other thing to remember is they actually were quite close to being able to do the charity marathon this year. They did nearly get that extraordinary tracking device about where you were in relation to other runners on the course. They nearly got that working. So hopefully this does mean next October, even if we don't have a vaccine by that point, they will be able to do it. And my final point on this is, if Hugh Brasher has got that tracker to work, I think he should run the National Test and Trace Programme, because clearly the marathon have achieved something that appears to be beyond Dido Harding at the moment. So yes, I think Hugh for track and trace, people.
No, and it's really interesting with the 2.6 challenge, because yeah, you said some charities found it really helpful, others didn't. Just to do a short plug, so next week we're joined by Max Newton from Shelter, who their average gift was significantly more than the general average for other charities, despite being homelessness, which tends not to get kind of as high value donations. So he's going to talk through what they did in terms of stewardship to get that. So that might be interesting for people on here. I love that there's some jokes coming on in the chat stream. Normally it's just left to you and me, Catherine, to make the jokes, and I don't think people find us that funny, so it's good to have other people doing it. Please do share your best. Great. Okay, next slide. Anything to add on that, Jane, I suppose, in terms of your kind of thoughts on how people can adapt to their challenge events?
No, I mean, I would just echo really what Catherine just said there. I know that 2.6 challenge was good. I thought what they managed to pull together in a really, really short amount of time was quite exceptional. I wouldn't be at all surprised if they continue with that as an activity, as a product. So yeah, that would be one to watch. I really like the fact that just made the marathon in inverted commas like so much more accessible to people, and that there were children getting involved, and even me. I mean, I managed to do something which is unheard of. So yeah, no, I thought that was pretty good given how much lead-in time they had.
Oh, okay. And then, so on to some case studies, Catherine. So Anthony Nolan, so let's talk us through what happened here. And then guys, there's just a little question around what's been your experience with virtual events. Have you taken part in ones that haven't been from your charity? Would be interesting to know. And what was your experience externally? And then how are you pivoting, or how have your virtual events performed so far? Sorry, Catherine, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks to Anthony for sharing this. So this is a pre-existing virtual event that they already had. And obviously they then ran it this year. So this was year 3. So it's a walking challenge, delivered digitally and virtually. So what they saw here was their warm supporters really did need to adapt this year because they were shielding. So those of you who are familiar with Anthony work, they provide stem cells to people who need transplants, who've got blood cancers and blood disorders. I can still vaguely remember the pitch years later. And obviously with those patients and their families, people who are very much compromised in terms of their immune system, so in the ultra shielding group. So some of these larger walks couldn't take place. What Anthony Owen did see was a huge proportion of the income coming in via Just Giving, as opposed to direct fundraising going on in the community. So on this event, you have your individual Just Giving page, and it links to an overall campaign page. The things that worked for them in the supporter journey, where they did have a visible team financial target on that campaigns page, and that did really motivate supporters to try to contribute their bit to the overall total. So people do like that. They like that overall total, and they can contribute to it. But they also sort of essentially, I think part of these virtual events are really interesting. Part are very new and sophisticated, but lots are actually still picking up the good traditional parts of fundraising. So they did a steps count sweepstake that people really liked. They produced an editable sponsor form that they could email out to people to get around this issue about supplies and delivery of fulfillment houses, which I know lots of you will have been experiencing. And they really saw those supporter journey steps boosting income. And interestingly, again, they saw a lot of high percentage of the income coming from high value supporters, which is a feature of these virtual events. They do produce high value supporters, which is really interesting. So far, this year's challenge is on track to raise 75k. So that is lower than 2019. However, that is certainly better than they were concerned about earlier in the summer. They managed to pull together really quickly. And of course, the net on these events is excellent because you've got lower costs because you're not doing the physical event. So I think it's an interesting example of a pre-existing event that is still working during coronavirus, and they did manage to adapt successfully.
And generally, I'd be interested, guys, are you all finding your average gifts on these events or the ways that you've updated, are they higher? Because, there tends to be, the reason the charity sector survives through a recession, I guess, is because people tend to come out and give in times of crisis to charities more generously than they would normally. So it'd be interesting to see if across the board you've found that. So that'd be interesting. But great, on to the Breast Cancer Now Step Challenge.
Yeah, so this is a Facebook fundraiser. So the whole thing is delivered within Facebook. You sign up to a Facebook ad, you set up a Facebook fundraising page, you get a specific Facebook group for the challenge and an email supporter journey. And I know these have been very common and cited throughout the sector and have been doing very well for charities of a range of sizes and a range of causes. And I think what is really interesting about this was Breast Cancer Now's test event. So 300,000 steps in a month, and that sort of quite simple physical exercise target seems to work very well on these. They had 5,000 people sign up. They raised £365,000 on a test event, so way above their expectations. They've subsequently run 2 more, both of which are doing very well. There's one running at the moment, if people want to check it out on Facebook, which is the 400,000 step challenge, and they have a running one going at the moment. And again, high value supporters being developed by this. But their 2 most significant things are that 94% of these supporters were new to Breast Cancer Now, and that's been the same on the subsequent 2 Facebook events they've done. So this isn't cannibalizing existing community or mass participation or event supporters, it's finding a new audience. And a lot of the other charities I've been working with have also seen this. This has hit something new, which is very interesting for us as a sector. And what Breast Cancer Now are also particularly seeing is a real uplift on all types of Facebook fundraising. So they're seeing a big halo effect on Facebook birthday fundraising and general donations, and that is continuing to run. So they are now running at a much, much higher level every month on Facebook than they were before. So it's very interesting to see how these type of events can still work. And for example, I do know Refuge, for example, have got, you know, a whole program planned, and they're still seeing really, really good results. So I think the other thing to remember, people chatting on the chat string about averages going up, I think that's exactly right. And thank you to Mighton Hospice for sharing your example. That's a brilliant result on your cycle event. And I think the other thing to remember, of course, is for a lot of people, if you're in a permanent job in an area of the economy which is not massively adversely impacted by coronavirus, you actually have a lot of disposable income right now, because we can't go away on holiday in the same way. We can't go out in the same way and socialise. We're not travelling and commuting to work. So I think this whole thing around the fact, as ever, recessions do not affect people in the same way across the board. And a lot of typical charity events participants and their sponsors are going to be in those groups where actually there is quite a lot of disposable income knocking around.
Interesting. And Catherine, of those 94% of supporters that were new, how much data are you able to pull on that? Can you pull like age ranges, genders, that type of thing? Or is it do you just come into that data blind?
It depends on your data and your analysis team. So Breast Cancer Now have a fabulous analysis team led by the wonderful Sam Vale, and a great data team, and they have been able to do things. I was going to say do things in the back end. I mean, here we go. Quote that, ladies and gentlemen. But they have been able to essentially extract and manipulate this data more. But it's been work that they have done in house. It's not what you automatically get from Facebook. So yes, there are some things around. This obviously isn't quite as good or quite as easy on the analysis as if you are entirely running the event yourself. So the Anti-Nona one, for example, you sign up on the Anti-Nona website, they've got all the data. But of course, the advantage of this is it's a totally frictionless supporter journey, because you are keeping people within the platform. And I would argue there, you're probably getting many, many more benefits in terms of conversion and average raise because of the frictionless journey compared to analysis. But obviously, Breast Cancer Now have very cleverly been able to try and get the best of both worlds.
Interesting, because I say that with any kind of events and kind of community initiatives now, they're being led more through digital channels. So it's, and I guess we've always had, is it the term donor Dorothy or Dorothy donor, that kind of traditional donor profile of like 55 plus women giving to charities that have been milked for kind of the last 20 years, let's say. Maybe these are new audiences that we need to do more work on identifying and then actively targeting, because I think a lot of people are trying to embrace digital at the moment but aren't knowing where to start or what the kind of profiles look like. So I guess everything, even across challenge events community, needs to be more data driven than previously.
And engage with the supporters, right? You know, engage with the beauty of social media is you can talk to people directly. So it's really important to be active on those Facebook groups, engage with your supporters, get them on a Zoom call for a cultivation, find out who they are, talk to them. And Cara has made an excellent point in the chat string about seeing they're a charity based in Scotland and or Glasgow, in fact, that brilliant city. And I can't believe Regano's going to close, Cara. I'm just possibly, you know, that's the most devastating thing in lockdown anyway. Fabulous restaurant. So what they're seeing is support coming in from across the country. And I think what's very interesting is lots of charities I'm talking to, again, are seeing support from across the board on these digital and virtual events and way beyond their normal geographic area or their normal geographic hotspots that most charity have. So what this is enabling everyone to do is genuinely go nationwide. And you're seeing it particularly, for example, on online cultivation events, where people who would normally never get to a project visit or a physical event of yours are able to come online, which is fantastic. And brilliant to you. Cara, you're kidding me. Regano's not closed. This is amazing. Do email me offline on that. Seriously, as soon as we're able, I'm going to be up to Glasgow like a rat up a drain pipe. This is amazing.
Not a phrase that I hear enough, Catherine, so I'm glad that we've got onto that. So for testing and rolling out of virtual events, do you want to talk us through this diagram you've got here?
Yeah, just some sort of tips. And I know a number of you have tried these virtual events, will be planning to develop them or test them next year. So some things that are coming around. Have a simple concept. Don't overcomplicate it. Our supporters are endlessly innovative. They'll put their own spin on it, but have something simple like certain mileage within a month or certain timings. Try and make that frictionless supporter journey really, really smooth. As we know, every time there's a clunky stage in the journey, you will lose supporters. It definitely works creating social media groups. So either Facebook groups, which actually do really encourage people to start fundraising, to raise more. They start to encourage and sort of nudge each other. Strava groups also work really well. Peloton groups are really, really interesting at the moment. If your charity isn't checking out what is going on Peloton, virtually get yourselves on there, because there's something really interesting there about physical challenge, mental health, and people coming together for an element of interaction that they can do on Peloton. Sending physical materials is still really important in these journeys. So make sure you have some form of pack. So things like really simple mileage charts where people can tick off their progress. Incentives really work, as I said, particularly the clothing ones, hoodies and t-shirts. So again, as I'm sure all of you have found this time, those challenges about how do you physically get materials out to people if you're not in your offices. And I'm sure you've all been working away on that, but really important to have those fulfillment steps set up for next year, because it's only going to continue. And then that thing of, you will see high value supporters on these events. So what are you going to do with those high value supporters? How can you build one-to-one relationships with them? Because they are likely very much to want to repeat and do things bigger and better. So how do you pick them up, talk to them, and take them on that journey? Paul Lawrence is asking, can Peloton be adapted for indoor hand cycling? I don't know, Paul, but I'd be surprised if they're not going to, because if you've noticed, they've gone out into weights, stretches, almost yoga style things. So I'd be really surprised if they're not going to be able to do some sort of variant on that as well. But it's very interesting, because there are groups of fundraising supporters who only know one another through Peloton, who got together to do fundraising for the NHS charities at the start of lockdown, and are now actually looking for things to fundraise for, because they're all on Peloton together all the time. So really interesting to have a look at that. Virtual ladies lunch toolkit. This is excellent, Cara. That sounds like a gin thing, doesn't it? Which is just and I guess finally, Ashby, I suppose the overall thing about the really important things about maintaining warm events participants. So because of this importance of how important challenge events are, and the fact that we will all get back up to and beyond the previous levels of money we are being raising on this, but it's so important to stay in this market if it is working for your charity. So have a really close look at that event stewardship journey. So particularly for past participants who may not be rolling over to a future event or signed up at the moment. So if I had done a run for your charity in 2019 and completed my fundraising, what would I now be getting from you? So really think about how can you continue to communicate, thank, build engagement. As I said, those social media groups are working really, really well, and they do encourage more signups, more fundraising, more training. And the virtual stewardship has worked really, really well for challenge events participants. So Zoom calls, Facebook Lives, things where you as events team are talking to your supporters, giving them fundraising tips, getting their feedback on your plans for next year. There's no reason why we can't crowdsource a whole load of insight on your virtual events. Would they do it? What do they think about it? What do they need? Doing Q&A with your chief execs is really, really great. And then bringing on board anything you've got in terms of dietitians, running or cycling trainers, physios, all that stuff that you would have done for example, your marathon runners, you can do online for everyone. So I think that important of maintaining these cohorts of warm participants, even if they can't do something for you next year, because you are going to need them in future years. And their insight is vital, because they will know how to make this work.
Great. Okay, perfect. So over to you now, Jane, your time in the spotlight. So talking about special events, and I know someone asked earlier how you're defining this, so kind of anything that isn't challenge, basically your lunches, quizzes, etc.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange term. I'm not a massive fan of the term special events, if I'm honest, but that's a conversation for another time. And I think people outside of the sector really have no clue what it means. But anyway, I'm going to assume, yes, the way I define it, anything non-challenge. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. And just to the three sort of things that I want us to consider in the next sort of 15 minutes or so, like whether or not this is the right format for your organisation. As I said earlier, you're all going to have different kind of challenges and setups. So one size does not fit all, but I'm also going to talk about some kind of non-negotiables that you ought to consider if you do decide to host your special event online. And then also a little bit about the kind of aftercare, supporter journey and follow-up, similar to what Catherine was just talking about. So yes, do you ask any questions? Thanks, Ashby.
Oh gosh. There we go.
Okay, so is this the right format for you? As I said, one size does not fit all. There are loads of options out there at the moment, and there's more kind of being created as we speak, probably. So the types of events that we're currently seeing, you can either have like a totally pre-recorded event, or you could have a live stream event, which obviously is produced live, or you can have like a mix of the two. And I've seen examples of all of these being done to varying degrees of success. And I'm going to talk through some of the pros and cons in a minute or two. Somebody just asked something about different platforms. I don't necessarily have like my kind of favorite type of platform, or I don't even really know that I would be able to give you a best kind of choice, because it really does depend on so many aspects of what it is that you want that event to look like. Those are just some of the ones that I've seen work. So Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, fundraising everywhere. That's Nikki Bell and Simon, can't remember his surname, but they've got that platform that I know that they've been doing some events on there. Tiltify, Spark, or another company. Plus there's just hundreds more. So yeah, I mean, maybe even more than that, but they'll all be offering different types of like price points, different types of options for your event. I would say that if you've done special events prior to coronavirus, it would be worth reaching out to any AV or production company that you may have worked on in that event. I know that Great Ormond Street did an event back in May, and they took that approach. So they spoke to their production company who would have produced their dinner for them and all their AV, and they came up with a solution together. So that could be an option. You could go and talk to your kind of AV or production company if you did do a dinner prior to all of this.
It would just be really interesting, because some people are posting the ones that they've used. If you can maybe talk through your experience of like working with Fundraising Everywhere, or anyone's working with Tiltify, you know, if you've worked across a couple, it'd be useful for someone, if any of the guests have got an attendance or a preference even to say, that's always useful. Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. And just sort of reach out to them, you know, like as we were talking earlier about sort of suppliers, and I think they will obviously be having challenging times right now too. Their businesses will have been completely thrown upside down with everything that's been going on, and no kind of real physical kind of special events happening this last sort of 7-8 months or so. So they'll be looking at ways to adapt their businesses. So it's a good opportunity to talk to them and try and find a solution that will work best for you. So that was just
great. Yeah,
I can't actually see the chat, Ashby.
Oh, so. No, that's fine. Sometimes Zoom lets you see it, sometimes it doesn't. It's all a mystery. I'll pull out anything that's relevant. Catherine mentioned on the chat the Tiltify, using Tiltify and the Tiltify webinar. So yeah, Tom did a really interesting one. We've got one on our YouTube channel as well that we did with him that might be worth just having a little look at. That would be great. And then on to our next slide. So talking through, I guess, an example, Jane.
Yeah, so this is exactly what you've just mentioned. This was live streamed on Twitch using Tiltify fundraising interactivity. I think we have some Marie Curie fundraisers on the call today. So I hope I get this right, but this was one of the celebrity quizzes that I believe was hosted back in May. You'll notice it's not the best screenshot I've taken off the Facebook page, but you'll notice the totalizer at the top right hand corner there. And the nice thing about this is it was delivered live, is that they were able to alter that and update that total as the fundraising was coming in. So I think it went from 30k at the beginning of the event, and then it was put up to 50k. And you could sort of see the bids as they were coming in. So there's one there that you can see saying anonymous donated £5, which makes it just far more kind of interactive and just energetic. And Alison Stedman was able to kind of talk about each of those donations as they came in. She was able to take requests, I believe. So it made for a really fun and interactive, engaging event, and I think it raised something like 65,000 or something in total. They were able to like message, like asking for like impressions and questions. I think the actor who plays Gavin in Gavin and Stacey was also on there as well. So so that was a really nice example of a live stream from using a platform that we may have thought was just dedicated to sort of gaming. That's not necessarily the case. So this was obviously a quiz But I really love the fact that it was able to be really, really interactive and engaging.
Yeah, and the Marie Curie quiz and this one particularly, and also the Refuge Squat Challenge, Catherine, are probably the most referenced, aren't they, in all of the, and maybe just in our webinar series, but across the sector, I think everyone's talking about them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there is absolutely still appetite for people to sign up for things at a particular time, have that live interaction. And I think, you know, having that ability to see the live totalizer, engage with your audience via chat or whatever streams you have is really important live on the night. But there's definitely still demand for that. And remember, you know, we are going into the dark, cold winter here. There's going to be, and we're going to probably be in different forms of lockdown. So I think there's going to be even more demand for these sort of things. I myself have just signed up for an evening of Agatha Christie this evening, which I'm very much looking forward to because I am that middle-aged. But I think the idea, I think this is nowhere near saturated, Jane. Do you? I think if you get the right sort of content for your audience, the audiences are definitely there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can just see on this screenshot, there's 4.3 thousand comments. So, you know, that type of engagement, you wouldn't get that in a live event, you know, because you'd be restricted by the number of people you could get into the venue. So to the point made earlier, this is really opening up opportunity for people and to get whole new audiences to hear about your charity.
Yeah. Great. Okay. And Catherine mentioned the long, cold winter. Don't worry, guys. We will have dry weather soon. It will be nice. Jane, on to the Passage then. So this is quite a small charity. So interesting to hear a bit about what they've done.
Yeah. So this is a homeless charity based in London called The Passage. This was an entirely pre-recorded special event. And it was run with Spark, who are the production company I just mentioned. It's spelled SPARQ, as you can see at the bottom of that image there. And you can actually go to their website and still view this event. It's still on their website. And I would really recommend doing that, just so you can get a kind of flavour for how a pre-recorded event could look. It was really, really slick. They were able to, so this would have been a real event that they would have delivered on their roof of their organisation in central London. Obviously, when coronavirus hit, they had to look at ways that they could sort of pivot it onto online. So they used a guy called Adam Frost. He's a Gardening World presenter. And he invited people into his garden and he taught them through all the various parts of his garden. They had 600 viewers tuning in, and I'm sure many more will have watched it since. And they had like a Q&A from viewers who submitted their questions ahead of the event. They had like a really nice pre-record from the Charities CEO, actually stood within the charity talking about how the pandemic has affected their services and what they're doing as a result of that. They had a cocktail masterclass with HMS Spirits, which one of their sponsors, and it raised £10,000, which for them was really a really awesome result, and will go towards supporting homeless people in emergency accommodation during the pandemic. So yeah, as I said, really slick production, would definitely worth watching that, and maybe even having a look on Spark's website to sort of see how an event like that could look for you.
It's always nice, I think, because obviously they have lower profile as being a smaller charity, to see kind of how they've worked creatively to get that done.
And just to say on that one, the fundraising was done via Givergy, so they had an auction that was running on Givergy as well. So yeah.
And thanks, Phil, for sharing the link to that. That's really, really nice. Cool. Okay, so the non-negotiables of what we should do.
Yes, I mean, that sounds quite severe, doesn't it? But I guess just sort of, it's just thinking through the things that you'll want to make sure you've got squared away. So even though you're not doing your special event in person, in a real life sort of situation, there's still a lot to pull together. Just because there isn't a venue and there isn't catering and things like that, there's still lots of aspects to it. A lot of this stuff is quite new to us. It will be quite new to your supporters. So you really need to think about your sign-up process, loads of pre-event comms. I don't think you can kind of overdo that bit, really. You have to assume that your supporters may not be all that comfortable or that used to dealing with platforms, you know, and logging in and things like that. So the more that you can sort of tell them about links, where they need to go, what would happen if the stream was to go down, all that sort of stuff, I think the better. And to Catherine's point earlier, having some kind of Facebook group would be really, really valuable as well. So guests can kind of chat beforehand and during, you know, and it kind of just keeps that engagement. And if you can't have the chats within the events, which I know some platforms do allows for that, which is also really nice. Don't assume your audience will be warm to your charity, just as in the challenge event. These special events are seeing lots of new audiences. So I would assume that just as many people won't know about your charity. So do talk about your cause. Tell them about the impact the money will make. Include emotive case studies. Behind the scenes footage works really, really well. As Catherine was saying, any kind of like CEO talking about what's going on, or directors or frontline staff. It kind of makes the audience feel like they're kind of getting a bit of a VIP, like behind the scenes sort of treatment. So I think that could be really nice. Backup plans. Obviously, if things go wrong, you're going to need to know what your plan B, C, D, E, F, G, H, whatever is going to be. Just get those really, really watertight, especially if you're all working remotely with your team. It's not like you can just, if you're in a hotel where you could go, oh my God, something's happened, and you can all kind of work together to sort it out. You may not be together. So you need to be really, really clear on what those plans are going to be, from talking to your stakeholders to telling your guests exactly what they need to do, where they need to go to carry on watching. I would say ideally aim for 60 to 90 minutes in length. You don't want to be going on too much longer than that. I think watching something through a screen, you want to kind of keep it really tight and quite concise. And get expert tech support. I know that there's obviously a cost to doing this. Some organisations won't necessarily want to be paying out a lot of money for tech support, but I do feel like they are worth their weight in gold. You do not want to be the one person having to deal with all the things if anything was to go wrong, you know, if it went down halfway through your event or whatever. So yeah, get some tech support on that. I think even just doing something like this, like the Zoom webinar, is tricky enough. So yeah, I would say get some support if you can. Reach out to those companies and see what they're doing. And I think I've spoke through everything there.
Yeah, I think that tech support, I mean, you know, this is like my 16th one of these, but it's the first time that I've not been able to find the presentation straight off. So, you know, something exciting always happens.
Yeah. And then some nice to haves. I think, as Catherine mentioned, like incentives or kind of little kind of physical bits of merch really, really helps to kind of bring that kind of feeling of energy and like we're all in this sort of together. That kind of feeling that you would get if you went to an actual live event. How can you replicate that within people's homes? So some things that we've talked about in our group before is like, could you, if you're doing like a dance or a talent competition, could you send out little cardboard paddles, for example, so people could do scoring at home, or little silly party hats or props for dressing up? If you were doing a food or wine tasting type thing, could you send them some actual bits of food or wine? Could you send them a little sachet of hot chocolate or I don't know, something like some mulled wine spice or something like that for a Christmas event? So I think it's really worth looking at what the private sector are doing here. So as Catherine mentioned, Agatha Christie Night, I don't know if that's a charity event, but it
better be. Catherine's not allowed to do anything that's not charity sector related.
No, there's a I know a lot of restaurants.
Certainly not charity sector related. No. But lots of people being bumped off, which will be excellent.
So have a look at what other things. If you're struggling for ideas, have a look on like a site like Eventbrite and just sort of see what virtual events are coming up, because there are just absolutely loads. So you'll get some ideas there, lots of creative, innovative ideas. Guests are more likely to tune in and share on social media. I think if they've got something like a prop or some merchandise to take photos with, so that's also good for the social media. The nice thing about virtual events, I think, is kind of that you know, having like that feeling like you're kind of getting a bit of a behind the scene or a bit of a special kind of thing. So like a celeb or someone well known or an actual musician who's doing something from their home, it can make you feel a bit like you're getting a special performance, you know, a special sort of VIP experience.
Sorry, just mindful of time, and the pre or post drinks, so kind of involving them in that potentially.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no reason why you couldn't do that in some kind of breakout room. You know, you could have a bit of a special reception beforehand. These are just two examples that I pulled off, one off our website and off our Facebook group, and then Hotel Chocolat virtual tasting experience. So that Eloise posted this thing about Dine In for Lebanon event. So yeah, it's just some ideas there. They did a playlist on Spotify as well, which is a really nice idea. Post-event comms are absolutely crucial. You need to make sure that you've got that really mapped out. You know exactly where you're going to be sending your support, what information you're going to be sending your supporters, and what their next step can be. Is it a one-to-one meeting that you want to get, repeat attendance at a future event, insight and feedback? So just map all that out and make sure you know what you're doing, what's next. And then finally,
cons and pros.
Cons and pros, yeah. So I went cons first. It is really difficult to replicate the energy of a live audience. I don't know if anyone watches Strictly Come Dancing, but I noticed that on Saturday night without the live audience, it felt different. Same with like Britain's Got Talent. You know, it is difficult to not have that live audience there. You absolutely have less control of the guest experience. You don't know what they're doing or what they're saying, or you know how they're receiving that information when they're sat at home. A lot of this is new and largely untested, so there obviously are some cons there. However, on the flip side, there's massive extended reach of online events. They're super accessible and easy to attend. You can attend an event in Glasgow, as Cara said earlier. There's a real opportunity there to rethink old events, try something new. You know, you don't have to always put in your dinner now, you know, for 2021 that perhaps you've always done every year. You could really think about doing something new and fresh. And there's opportunity for increased collaboration. If the costs or the investment of getting a tech company too prohibitive for your charity, is there another organisation, another charity that you could perhaps partner up with and put something on together? I think there's opportunity there.
Great. Okay, perfect. And just before we wrap up, guys, so here's some useful information and next steps. Someone asked, will I send the slides round? Absolutely, and the recording, so don't worry about that. We've got some of the offerings that Catherine and Jane have got in place, some of which is free, some of which are paid for, but all great value. So you can click on those links once we've got them through. I think we've answered questions as they've come through, but if anyone has any kind of last minute questions or things that they particularly want to ask Jane and Catherine, please do type in now. I guess just more broadly, because I wouldn't want anyone to put anyone on the spot, Jane, Catherine, we've got about 5 minutes left. In terms of those events teams that don't feel like their organisation are supporting them to try new things, or are giving budgets, or they're facing really harsh cutbacks, what would you advise to those people to kind of encourage their senior leadership team to keep investing?
I think it's about talking about the wider benefits of events as well as the money. So I think it's that sense of the fact that when someone signs up to do a run for you, they reach out to their entire network to try and get them to sponsor them, right? And also a lot of the time they'll be doing wider stuff on social media and stuff, potentially with local press as well. So the multiplier effect of the number of people that find out about your charities through your runners and your cyclists and your trekkers is incredible. So there's a huge awareness raising value to these supporters as well. And then I think it is that point of, if you come out of these events and you pull back, it is going to take years to get back in, because it takes so long to try and get race places. And sometimes those race places simply won't be available if you give them up. So if you give up your London Marathon Gold Bond places, you're not getting that back. And then also you can only sign up to these events and get those race places. There's then usually at times a 12 to 18 month time lag before you're marketing those events. The runner is doing it and you're getting the money back in. So it takes a hell of a long time to rebuild. So it's a total false economy. That's not to say it's not a good opportunity to look at your portfolio events and go, which ones were really working for us? Where were we getting the best returns? Where do we maybe come away from a particular race and focus on other ones? So there's always that good practice of get your portfolio right. But yeah, I would never totally come out of challenge events. There was also a question on the chat string of had people managed to get corporate sponsorship on a virtual special event. Yes, I've spoken to some of my clients who've been doing that, but it has tended to be from existing or past warm corporate supporters. So it's tend to be where they've got a pre-existing relationship with the company, and the company then has been willing to sponsor. There's certainly lots of opportunities for gift in kind support, particularly around things like the food and wine tastings, where some of the charity events are being done in partnerships with those companies because they're looking to get their products out there. So gift in kind is also an avenue to explore.
Perfect. Okay, Jane, anything quickly to add? You probably have about 30 seconds if there's like one gem you can throw in.
I would just say, like in terms of talking to your directors, there's some real opportunity here. Like if one thing can be said about the pandemic is it's been a great leveler of sort of bringing everybody to a sort of similar level in a way that nobody knows yet. So we're all at that level because no one really knows what next year holds. So there's opportunity there to perhaps try something a little bit different, test it, see what happens. And you never know, you might find your next really big fundraising event comes out of it. So yeah.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for everyone joining us today, and also to both Catherine and to Jane. So as I said, I will send around those slides to you afterwards, and along with the chat as well, because there's been some good ideas shared on there. And then anything, our next webinar is on Thursday next week, which is with Max Newton from Shelter, which is focusing more around community fundraising, but there'll be crossover with events on there, so that's also worth attending. And then everyone else that's in the session, on the 11th of November, we have a session around digital fundraising and how to utilize that across all income streams. So that is vital for everyone's future success. So please do join us for that one as well. I'll send through the links too, but thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Catherine and Jane. And I will send everyone back out into the lovely weather we're having at the moment. It looks like it might have stopped. No, it hasn't. Sorry. All right. Thank you, everyone.